if we would have looked back in history far enough, we would actually see that the black face was actually one of high esteem and honor. And in today's society, it has become very hard to see a people that were once noble viewed in a positive context when much has been done to ostracize, dehumanize, and criminalize them. And the perception of blacks was not always this way, you know, especially with what we see going on today. And when we start studying things, especially with the openness of the internet, there's so much stuff that we can find now. But when we look back through history, we can see that a lot of black history has actually been distorted and hidden over the centuries. And historians have given much credit to Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato, but they somehow they never managed to question where those Greek philosophers got their education. And you know, as a matter of record, Aristotle and Plato actually had to flee from Athens, Greece, because philosophy was unknown to the people of Greece at the time, and it was unheard of. And so they actually rejected the information. They rejected that education. And Ionia was actually a place in Asia Minor. And they actually sent their students to Egypt for their education. And once their education was complete, some of them would return home, and some of them went to other parts of Europe, but they actually never took credit for the education as if they created, as if they owned that education. But students of Aristotle, when he died, they went to work on creating a Greek philosophy. Although in the ancient times, the book that they was learning from was actually called Wisdom of the Egyptians. And everyone during that day knew about this book. And even though Aristotle's students created this new philosophy, the government in Greece never accepted it. And so because they didn't accept it, they didn't approve it either. But all throughout various parts of the world, centuries ago, there was actually disdain held for anybody that didn't have a black face. And whites were described by Arabs, Asians, and Native Americans. And the original Native Americans were black. Look it up for yourself. They were actually described as stupid, ignorant, dirty, filthy, animalistic, and dumb, crude, and unlearned. And I mean, these aren't my words. These are just words of historians from time past. I mean, this is stuff I found back from the 900 AD and 1000 AD and stuff like that. And even Marco Polo said that the black face was so esteemed that when parents in South India had children, they would actually anoint the children in sesame oil because they wanted him or her to have dark skin, because they considered their idols and all of their gods were depicted as black and their devils were actually depicted as white. And even Greek historians Herodotus and Diodorus had much respect for the black skin as well. And so throughout history, we've seen in the past that whites would actually paint their faces black to mock the Negro race. But the part of history that's not told is that Chinese actors would don black masks at their operas because they felt that the black face was considered noble. The black face was actually considered courageous, righteous, and a white face was considered evil and deceitful. Now, like I said, you can look this stuff up on your own. But, you know, society today, you know, we have a lot of blonde jokes, and blondes were actually considered once as vile and peculiar. And, you know, it's amazing how things have turned around. And so a lot of what we see in society today are from these exact same cultures where they actually demonized non-black faces. And now they actually encourage their offspring to look for a spouse with the exact same features that they once disdained. And although history wants to only show the narrative of chattel enslavement of black Hebrews, the origin of the word slave came from European people who were called Slavs. And these Europeans were actually despised anywhere outside of Europe. And yes, I said black Hebrews, not African Americans. I mean, what other people around the world are described by a double continent? As a matter of fact, what other people are even described by a single continent? And Karl Marx said, and yes, I read Karl Marx too. I read a lot of stuff. People without a heritage are easy to manipulate. We don't know our true heritage as black people. And look at how we've been manipulated throughout the course of history all over the world. Everybody else knows our heritage but us. And because of that, we've been destroyed everywhere we've went in the world, because we don't even have a clue of who we are. And see, during the medieval period, this is when the shift started to take place. Everything that was once levied upon non-black skin was actually now levied against black skin. The Romans had been successful in driving out people in armies wherever they went. And we have to go back in history when they invaded Jerusalem in 70 AD, and they kept on invading and taking over lands all over the place. I mean, that's when the Hebrews were actually run out of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the black Hebrews. And so, one thing they could never do in all of their conquests, they could never overtake those Ethiopians. So something had to be done to discredit these people who had dark skin. So it shouldn't come as any surprise to any of us that the very place that found a way to discredit the black face was right in the heart of Rome at the Vatican. Pope Alexander VI, Roderick Borgia, wanted his army to attack the opposing armies, and his soldiers refused to do it. And the reason his soldiers refused to do it is because they told him they couldn't attack those people because those people had black skin. And according to the soldiers, the black skin was one that was closer to God. So they were not going to attack those men who they considered close to God. So the Pope contracted Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo to see which one of those guys would actually receive the contract to paint a new Christ, with his illegitimate son Caesar as the model. And Da Vinci would actually win a contract, and he went about creating this new image of Christ. And once this image was actually completed, the Pope went about showing this image to his soldiers of what Christ actually looked like. And this in turn allowed his soldiers to now attack the opposing armies, because the Pope said, see, God looks like us. He doesn't look like that other guy you've been looking at. And the true images of Christ and his disciples are said to be secured in the catacombs of the Vatican under 24-hour protection. Now, why would they do that? And we can actually see from this time forward that the black face has been one of disgust, no matter where we are around the world. And in 1985, former South African President P.W. Botha actually gave a speech. And he said he didn't pretend like other whites to like black people. He said blacks were inferior, they couldn't rule themselves, they were lazy, promiscuous, immoral, and emotionally incompetent. I mean that's pretty blatant right there. He said we were actually a consumer-minded people, and I mean he probably hit the nail on the head right there. You know, because we got to buy stuff to show people that we rich, instead of just being rich and not having to show everybody. You know, it's sad that a lot of our identities are actually wrapped up in stuff. And Botha said that our immorality should be used and exploited to their advantage. He said blacks had no vision for their own lives. And since we liked alcohol, they would actually place poison into our drinks before we even bought them. And this was actually to make our black men infertile. But not just the black men. On top of that, they actually created drugs to promote abortion in black women, and they utilized it in their clinics and hospitals. And if the black baby were to survive, the poisons they had already mixed inside the drugs would kill them once they left the womb. And sadly, many of our black women today volunteer for this procedure. We must understand that throughout history, there have been many forces that have worked feverishly to destroy us as a people. And when they can't do it on their own, they covertly contract us to do it by calling it choice. And we thank them for allowing us to destroy ourselves. I mean, we think about Moses, and Pharaoh ordered all black male Hebrew babies killed. And so, if you remember the story out of the Bible, Moses' mother got rid of him, and he went down the river, and that Pharaoh's daughter picked him up, and they went raise Moses in Pharaoh's house. And was trying to get rid of the black babies. And if you kill a black man, you have no seed to reproduce him. And then we think about King Herod. And King Herod ordered all black male Hebrew babies killed because he knew Christ was coming. And so the angel appeared to Joseph and Mary and told them to take Christ down into Egypt so they could blend in. Now, back to Moses. Throughout history, we've been told that Miriam and Aaron got on Moses because he married a black woman, that Cushite woman. And Moses was from the tribe of Levi. And if we read our Bibles properly, we know that the tribe of Levi was black. And the reason Miriam and Aaron got on Moses is because Moses and that Cushite woman were from two different tribes. It had nothing to do with skin color. Because if we continue reading, we'll see that Miriam turned white as snow. And when Miriam turned white as snow, that meant she had leprosy. And when your skin turned white, that meant you were cursed. Now, these are not my words. Read the Bible for yourself. And I'm going to bag up a little bit, and I'm going to even talk about Joseph. When his brothers sold him into slavery, and Joseph rose up to prominence in Pharaoh's house, and when the famine hit, Joseph's brothers came because their father sent them to get food, and his brothers didn't even recognize him in Pharaoh's house, so that meant Joseph was black. So, just wanted to throw that in there for you. And if we read our Bibles, and you know, I've actually read the missing books of the Bible as well. Out of Jacob's 12 sons, only 2 were blessed by Isaac, and that was Levi, which is where Moses came from, and Judah, which is where Jesus came from. So Jesus came down through that line of David and Bathsheba, which produced Solomon. And we know from Solomon's own pen word that he was black. I mean, but you think about a name like Bathsheba, you already know what color she is. But hey, you know, back to what I was saying about trying to destroy the black race. P.W. Bartha, I went to Moses, I went to Christ. And then in the early 20th century, Margaret Sanger created an organization called Planned Parenthood. And she said the goal was to exterminate the Negro race, and she was going to use the black pastors to do it. Well, that didn't work fast enough, because the Bible even tells us every time you try to kill the Hebrew children, they keep multiplying. So that didn't work fast enough. So in 1973, something called Roe versus Wade came about so they could give the black woman the choice to kill the black male Hebrew babies on her own. And I believe out of the 60 million babies that have been aborted since 1973, I think about 23, 24 million of them have been black babies. So just something to think about when you want to talk about society is not biased. And I mean, it is. And it has been forever. In the book White Over Black, author Winthrop Jordan had this to say: to liken Africans, or any human beings, to beasts was to stress the animal within the man. And by forging a sexual link between Negroes and apes, furthermore, Englishmen were able to give vent to their feelings that Negroes were a lewd, lascivious, and wanton people. Now, we can actually believe that because a lot of white men told their daughters that black men had tails like apes and all that, but this ain't the talk for what they were really trying to tell their daughters. But we did have white men from in history who believed that blacks were just as equal as themselves. And in the year 1700, in the selling of Joseph by Judge Samuel Sewall, he said this: these Ethiopians, as black as they are, seeing they are the sons and daughters of the first Adam, that's a tip there, the brethren and sisters of the last Adam, that's another tip, and the offspring of God, that's a third tip. They ought to be treated with a respect agreeable. And in the letters and papers of Ezra Stiles from 1759 were found these words by John Winthrop IV: it has long seemed probable to me that the original complexion of mankind, considering the climate they lived in, was swarthy or tawny. And tawny, if you look up tawny, you're going to see tawny means black or dark. And I mean, even Benjamin Franklin used that word as well. But in 1902, Thomas Dixon wrote a book called The Leopard Spot. And he claimed that emancipation had transformed blacks from being a chattel to be bought and sold into a beast to be feared and guarded. And if we look at our black men being cut down in the street nowadays, they consider themselves beasts. But just a side note, at this point in the year, the murder rate by cops on whites to blacks, it's almost twice as many whites that have been killed by cops than blacks so far this year. So just to throw that in, but you have to ask yourself, why do they put only black cops cops killing blacks on the news? Some of these incidents, there were 3 or 4 black guys got killed by cops the same day the other guys that were put in front of you showed up. But that's a whole other story. But in 1905, Dixon published another book, and it was called The Klansman. And in this book, he described blacks as half child, half animal, the sport of impulse, whim, and conceit. A being who, left to his will, roams at night and sleeps in the day, whose speech knows no word of love, whose passions, once aroused, are as the fury of the tiger. And it's amazing that, he said once their passions are aroused, and those white slave owners were raping those black female slaves at the drop of a hat and forcing the men to watch them do it several times, even forcing their own wives to watch them do it sometimes, and they had a nerve to call blacks beast. And so, during the slavery period and around that time, describing a black man as an animal was a way to kill him with no recourse. And all that had to be done was to accuse the beast of raping a white woman with no evidence to support it. I mean, how many incidents do we know of? I mean, look at the Scottsboro boys. And I mean, a lot of this stuff I'm going to address in the book that I'm working on, Culture Shockwave. But how many of our black men have actually been lynched and killed and imprisoned for the false allegations? But I'm not going to let everybody off, because we've had a lot of black women recently that have accused young black men of raping and they've been sent to prison for this as well. And one young man, when they found out he was innocent, the young lady who accused him sent him a friend request on Facebook. I mean, that's some throw off thinking. And today, we describe our best athletes as beasts. I mean, I have a cousin. She runs track for LSU. State champion in Texas a few years ago in the 100 and 200 meter dash. And talking to one of my college teammates sometime back, when I told him who she was, he said, "Oh man, your little cousin is a beast." I mean, so when we describe our athletes as beasts, society responds by cutting them down, because after all, a beast can harm or even kill you. So when we have our athletes describing themselves as animals and beasts, I mean, I saw a young lady on YouTube call herself a white tiger. She's an animal. She said she was an animal. She would devour you. I mean, so we can't just say our athletes are describing themselves like that. But if we're describing ourselves as animals and beasts, how do we change the image or perception in society when we actually are the ones promoting it? Now, there were men on both sides of the spectrum in large numbers who felt that the Negro was less than and equal to humans. So we can't paint the whole white race with one broad paintbrush stroke and say all of them are evil and prejudiced. Just as we can't say that all blacks are good and unbiased. And although we've come a long way in society, there's still a prevalent disdain for the black face in some circles. Just as recently as 2007, Nobel Peace Prize winner Dr. James Watson, he won a Nobel Peace Prize in 1962, said that he was inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa because all of our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas all the testing says not really. Well, I don't know what test he's looking at, because I've come across a whole bunch of them. And yeah, you're going to have some people that say, yeah, this test is right, whatever. I've seen tests from that said the brain capacity is the same. I've seen tests that said our brain capacity is less than. Now, I've never seen any tests from any of these folks that said we have a greater brain capacity. But that's amazing, you know, because that solidifies the thought process that we're inferior as a people. And in the year 2010, a Harvard student named Stephanie Gray said this: "I absolutely do not rule out the possibility that African Americans are, on average, genetically predisposed to be less intelligent." But in her defense, she did say under the same circumstances, we would actually see them as intelligent as whites. And as blacks, we've never received reparations for slavery, although every other group of people who were mistreated in this country have been given them. And, you know, some people even outside of this country. I mean, just last year, Jews, the Obama administration gave Jews $12 million so they wouldn't live in poverty the rest of their lives. I mean, Joe Biden was the one that was pushing it, but why didn't Obama say, hey, what about my folks? You know why he didn't say it? Because you ain't his folks. And the funny thing is, as black people, we're all for illegal immigrants coming here. And that's kind of funny, because the illegal immigrants are able to come here and they're going to get free health care. Now, the funny thing about that is, if you choose not to have insurance, you get penalized every year and every month, because you have to put in by month that you have it or don't have it. And for each month you don't have it, you pay a penalty. Now, guess where that penalty is going? The penalty is going to provide free health care for illegal immigrants and their kids. They come over here, they're going to get all the welfare benefits, all the food stamp benefits, and you can't get jack. So I don't understand why black people is in support of everybody else getting money, and they still ain't got nothing. I mean, you've had a black president for almost 8 years in the White House, The Congressional Black Caucus is 100% black Democrats, with the exception of Allen West being in it for about a few years ago. And we have all of these black Democratic politicians, congressmen, and state senators and all that. So you have all this black control, and not one of them has introduced anything to pay black folks. But hey, that's just me talking. Now for me personally, I don't care what color your skin is. A person without character and integrity can come in any color. My mother's best friend growing up was a white woman. And my grandmother worked for white dentists in Pasadena, Texas when I was a little boy. And sometimes she would actually take me to work with her. And those dentists loved on me just like I was one of their own. And this was in an era when Pasadena, Texas was considered highly racist. They said the KKK, the majority of them actually lived in Pasadena at the time that were down in this area. And the mentor of my mentor is a white man. And not once have I ever seen any disrespect towards my mentor from him. If we're going to move forward in this society as a people in a positive direction, we must start looking at the character of a person and not his or her skin color. Our skin color is and has been a source of division for quite some time. When the lack of skin color unites us, the media uses politics. When this device looks to fail, they use income disparity. When this one seems like it might not work, they use education or the lack of it. And by the time we get around to those areas, we eventually get back to skin color. And so we see whites getting killed, but this doesn't stir up racial strife like I mentioned earlier. And it doesn't stir up hatred. Black on black crime gets promoted in the media all the time. And you know, that's what we'll talk about a lot whenever, you know, a black person get killed by a non-black, because it seems like that's the only time we really care about black lives. But black on black crime gets promoted all the time. And I mean, I'm more concerned about black on black crime than any other thing, because I need to make sure my house is okay first. You know, if my house is on fire, it's probably best that I try to make sure my wife gets out safe before I go next door and try to rescue my neighbors. I mean, because when I got married, I told my wife she was the first person in my life on this earth. So don't come telling me about white on white crime and Latino on Latino crime, because I'm really right now only concerned about black on black crime, because my people killing one another. And when I say my people, I'm talking about skin color, because when we become new creations in Christ, all of us are one people. But black on black crime gets promoted in the media all the time, but we barely hear a stain of white on white or Hispanic on Hispanic crime. When we hear blacks committing crimes, our prejudices are already at full throttle, because the media and society have promoted that blacks are criminals over and over and over again. Just last year, I lived down here in Houston, but just last year, almost a year ago, might have been a little bit over a year ago, and one night there were 11 people who were shot in Houston in 7 different incidents. The only time the color of the perpetrator was mentioned was when he was black. If you want to know if the criminal was not black, all you have to do is listen, and they will tell you what color he was by not telling you what color he was. We look at over 90% of the serial killers in this society, and they're always white. But society never manages to look at whites as murderers. Practically each one of these men was described by neighbors and co-workers as outstanding members of their communities and churches, on top of being charismatic. I mean, Jim Jones even received a humanitarian award. When we look at embezzlers and high-profile monetary theft, the great majority of those thieves are white, but nobody looks at the white race as common thieves. When we look at who commits most of the rapes in society, even during slavery, the white man wins that one hands down as well, but no one distrusts them with their women. When we look at the great majority of pedophiles throughout the world, the white man wins that battle. I mean, I was on the FBI site the other day, and it's amazing that they could describe every criminal by race except when it came to white. When it came to white, they lumped white and Hispanic in the group together. And the conclusion I drew from that was they don't want to show how criminal whites are. And I'm not promoting one race or other. I'm just telling you stuff that's out there. And we don't understand this subtle stuff. But we look at the pedophiles, but somehow a black preacher became the face of sexual perversion, even though all these other incidents were happening. I mean, Jared talking about he need to get out of jail. I mean, I just saw the other day, white kid raped an 18-month-old baby. He gonna do 6 months and he's free. A few weeks ago, another white college student raped 2 young women, and the judge said he didn't want him to have that stain on his record for the rest of his life. I mean, blackface don't get that same option. I mean, even the assassination of JFK and the Oklahoma bombing by Timothy McVeigh was blamed on black Muslims. When we think of certain subjects, we can usually think of a name or a few right off the top of our heads. And when we think of serial killers, we can all mention Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer off the top of our head. When we think of embezzlement, we can think of Enron and Bernie Madoff. We can look directly at Greece and their fascination with naked men, or the Catholic Church and their pedophilia scandals, but we somehow manage to overlook all of these things because all of these incidents happened by men with white faces. Even though it would take you a while to look it up anyway, can you name me one black serial killer or one black embezzler off the top of your head?